Imagine working on a film with unrestricted hours, unenforced turnaround, and unrequired meal breaks. Imagine working under a 7-year contract that you cannot break and are more likely to be forced to renew. For a producer that can also tell you who you can marry and what your morals will be and your political opinion. This is the beginning of a speech from Ken Onassis, former president of the Screen Actors Guild. He's describing what life is like for an actor during the 1933 under the 7-year contract. So today I would like to tell you guys about 3 different facts that have changed the movie industry forever. There's 3 major things: the Paramount case, the 7-year contract, and the invention of television. First, I would like to tell you about the Paramount case. Originally, studios owned the movie theaters. They were split up into they split up the country into different regions, and they would sell They would sell smaller movies to They would sell movies to smaller theaters too, in a blind bidding, which is basically they would sell them the movie without them ever even seeing it. Basically, what happened was you had Warner Brother, Paramount, RKO, MGM, and Fox. Well, later Fox. Basically, what happened was that in 1948 they went to court, and then they were seen in front of the Supreme Court about how they were making basically 100% profit on all their stuff. They had to sell their movie theaters, and later they had to end up making more money by raising their prices and making less movies. And smaller independent theaters were also able to grow from this. Basically, the next thing I'd like to go over is the next point I'd like to bring up is about the 7-year contract. Basically, the way it worked was that if you were hired by a studio, you were put on a 7-year contract. And basically what that meant was that you belonged to the studio. You basically had no rights, in a sense. What they would do is the head of the studio would pick a person. Everyone was under contract. They would pick the writer, the director, the actors, and the crew. Were all lined up in a row, and they were always all told what they were going to do exactly. Basically, if you didn't feel like you didn't want to do it, you said, I'm done with this. Basically what happened was you would be let go, but you were still under your contract, so you could not be hired by another studio. So if you were an actor and you decided that you didn't want to make that film, but they told you had to, they would let you go, but you had to sit about another 4 or 5 or 6 years alone, because you can't work for another studio until that contract's up. And basically, one person that kind of stuck out to me was Judy Garland. Judy Garland was under the contract, and she was talking about her experience under the 7-year contract with making Babes in Broadway in 1941 with Mickey Rooney. They had us work day and night on end. They gave us pills to keep us on our feet after we were exhausted. Then they would take us to the studio hospital and knock us with sleeping pills. Mickey sprawled on one bed and me on another. After 4 hours, they would wake us up with prep pills again, and we'd work for another 72 hours. That way we worked, and that's the way we got thin, that's the way we got mixed up, and that's the way we lost control. Basically, this is one of the effects of what happened to... She ended up later dying with a sleeping pill overdose. And basically, what happened later on was the Screen Actors Guild and also the Screenwriters Guild was the first one to fight against the contract. They came across it, and then they fought against it, and then soon after, all the other companies, all the different divisions like directors started to follow behind. The Screen Actors Guild was actually created in 1937 from this, and to get better work out of for the actors. Now that I kind of showed you guys two major points about the movie studio business that kind of hurt their infrastructure, I'd like to tell you guys about how, like, television, the invention of television has affected them in a lot of ways. A lot of us have all seen 3D movies, or originally what was called CinemaScope is now later evolutionized into IMAX. And basically, when television was originally created, the movie studios were being hurt. Because according to TVHistory.com, there's a statistic that in 1953, 50% of all Americans had a television set in their homes. That's about 25,233 homes that had televisions. This affected them deeply, so most studios tried to come up with ways to fight against it. So these weren't new concepts, they were kind of the old concepts, but what they did was they kind of re-evolutionized them, they put more effort into them. So they also had smell-o-vision. And basically what this would do was they would try to tell people that you don't want to stay home, you want to get out there and you want to go to the movies. Why stay home and see something on a 2-inch screen and, you know, get to actually experience it? And so there was a lot of controversy over, you know, and a lot of studios tried to fight against it. They were working end on end, trying to make sure that television wasn't going to become the new big thing. Just a kind of thing for, out of all these were the three smallest studios at the time. It was Columbia, Universal, and United Artists. Does any of these strike out to you guys as becoming one of the biggest of all times? Yep. Universal grew from this decade. For in the 50s, they decided to embrace television, and since they were kind of hitting a slow, dry spell, they decided, hey, instead of working against movies in television, why not have them buy our sets, rent our sets out to them? Let's work with them. So they actually ended up spending more money with them, trying to get them to work with them, and they ended up being one of the first ones to come out with a television movie. So they ended up growing into one of the majorest empires for the movie industry. And you know, I hope that you were able to learn more about these three major events that helped change the movie industry. Since if they didn't change, and if you ever became an actor, and let's be thankful that you don't have a producer that you don't know telling you what to do. Thank you.
All right, Ryan, what did you think?
I thought the thesis was a little broad, but I think your preview cleared that up. And then sometimes it got a little confusing when you started talking about two people or two studios, and you kept saying them and they, and then them again. And overall, I think your speech was pretty good, pretty informative. I didn't know any of that stuff before, and that's about it.
All right. The visualization and the quote that you have at the beginning, I think, is pretty good. The topics identified. You do have a very clear thesis statement that you're setting up. I think you need to give us a little bit of justification as to why we're talking about this. In other words, you know, this is part of the evolution of business. I want to show you how much the business has changed from the old days, and these are the three things that are the biggest explanations for the change in the business. Something like that, because it just sort of seems kind of random when you start off. I'm going to talk about three reasons, you know, three things that have changed in the movie business. okay, that's like I'm going to talk about 3 actors, and I just picked 3 because they're alphabetically in order. You got to have a reason for doing it, and I didn't think that came across as clearly as it needed to. Let me